All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first part of the new training. I'll just ask firstly if we've got any apologies today. I think Councillor Halal.
Yes, Deputy Mayor Hana Halalele.
Excellent. And secondly, any declarations of interest?
I'll just move we accept the apology.
My apologies. Thank you. My apologies. Any declarations of interest? No. Excellent. Thank you. So we'll now move into the agenda, but just before we do so, I thought I'd perhaps give a really brief introduction for the new members about what the PAR is and what we're hoping to achieve over the course of the next 3 years. So the key purpose of the Performance Audit and Risk Committee is for us to monitor the implementation of the council decisions and to help make sure that we're effectively achieving this council strategic objectives. So PAR by default is Performance Audit and Risk. So each quarter we will have a presentation from a specific area. So we'll look at the financials, we'll look at the audits, we'll look at the risk. But what I'd really like to do over the course of the next training is for us to identify key areas where we as a committee would like to explore further some of the activities of the council. And so I'll be working with each of you over the course of the next couple of months to identify some specific areas where you would like to potentially investigate further, and then we'll kind of bring that up and surface it, and Paul and I will pull together a plan of what we'd like to investigate further over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. So for example, one of the things that I'm really keen to work with Mr. Wells on is getting a better understanding of our sensitivity to changes in OCR given our debt book, and what that means for us as we move through a different interest rate environment. There might be other areas that you'd like to look into, such as the investment portfolio, or some specific risks. When Amelia presents the risk register to us, we might be more interested in some of the climatic implications or some of the other areas. So over the course of the next month or so, I'm really keen to get your feedback on what you as councillors and representatives of the PAR would like to look at further, and we'll tease that into sort of a more formal agenda and structure that over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. Does anybody have any questions off the back of that before we move into the formal agenda? Okay, so with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 3.1, the financial report, and I will hand over to Mr. Hope and Mr. Wells.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. So the first matter we're looking at is the summary financial report for the first quarter of the 22-23 financial year. Probably plan to take this maybe slightly slower than we usually do, given the number of new members, and really want to give you the opportunity to ask questions as we move through the pages. Our standard format for these is I generally give a bit of an overview and then pass over to Mr. Wells, who gives some more detailed comments, particularly expanding on anything in the first couple of pages that are, I suppose, notable items that have occurred over the quarter, and then commentary on where we are as a council, how we're performing, particularly against budget that is set through the annual plan process. And then there's a reasonable amount of supplementary information to sort of expand on some of the areas that are reasonably unique to councils. And then, yeah, it's really, this report has evolved over time. It's based on the detail that we present in the annual report. So in sort of the generally accepted accounting practice format, then with some supplementary information. Very happy to change this report if it is not meeting your needs. But really, probably in the first couple of meetings, it would be more about this is why we're trying to answer the question. This is why we're showing you this information. This is what we're trying to tell you. And then, as the chair said, really want to work through the process of making sure that this committee is as effective as possible, which will be, well, I'd like to know a bit more about this, or I don't understand quite the purpose of this, the information you're presenting. Perhaps if you present it in a different way, it might be more useful. So it is quite numbers heavy rather than something that is a bit more visual. And that's something we'll probably want to work on and make it a little easier to see trends and patterns over time. I think that's where some real, a lot of the real value is. It's what's changed from in the past. So with that, I'll pass over to Mr. Wells just to run through the higher level commentary. Probably pause for questions at the end of that, and then start working through the financial statements, getting questions at the end of that, and then into the some of the supplementary information, which is a bit more unique to council, as I said, and so probably that's maybe where we have a bit more of a discussion about some of the things that we are presenting. So over to Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Paul. On page 6 of the agenda, you'll find the introduction to the financial reports, and here we've picked out what really are the major changes. First thing to note is that the first quarter, we always budget for a deficit. A large number of one-off annual costs are incurred in the first quarter, being a chunk of the insurance premiums. We pay our own rates to ourselves, which you may find is an odd thing to do. Some councils don't record their own rates as an expense. Likewise, they don't record the revenue. We go the other way. The main standout points in quarter one is the additional cost incurred by council of just over $3 million for emergency works relating to adverse weather events that occurred, I believe, in July. We have submitted a claim for 2.1 million from Waka Kotahi, who normally fund 57% of our approved roading budget. In the case of emergency works, they fund 57% up to a quarter of our approved budget for the year, and then they fund another 20% above that for the balance of the emergency works. Without that emergency works, we would have been fairly close to budget. So that really is the standout in quarter one. Do you want any further clarification about that, or can we move on to page 7? As noted, our council will have to fund the balance of just short of $1 million from the disaster fund, because there's no real other source of funding for that, and we do strive to have a balanced set of books.
Sorry, Mr. Wasser, just a question on that. You mentioned 57%. Is that per event, or once we've used a certain amount of the funding, is it then 20% thereafter? If we had another event, would we go through the same process?
Hopefully we wouldn't, and hopefully the acting group manager for assets can expand on that. But I believe actually I can't tell you what I believe, because I don't believe we've had more than one adverse weather event in a year in the past. Hopefully we won't have another one this year.
Yeah, they treat each event separately. But yeah, as said, it's pretty unusual to have two major events that you'd actually go across the spend threshold to justify the extra spending.
Just to clarify, the total unanticipated cost of that emergency was north of 3 million. We've asked for 2 from Waka Kotahi. Have they paid that yet? Have they given us any indication if and when they will, if they haven't?
So I understand that the claim has been submitted. It's been discussed with them. It's not been approved by them. So they're happy with what we've put forward, but it's yet to go through their process. I believe there's more than us claiming for emergency works this time around. And we don't expect not to receive it, but I can't tell you when we will receive it.
Supplementary then, we've got this claim into Waka Kotahi for north of 2 million. If you look at further on, there's a reference to the fact that we've used the B&Z Carl Fund So we've taken 2 million out of that to pay for emergency road. So on the face of it, it looks as though we've actually borrowed or asked for more money than the 3 million we actually incurred. What is the 2 million from the B&Z funds essentially to fill the hole that we're hoping Waka Kotahi will eventually fill? Is that what that's about, or is it additional to additional to what we've asked from Waka Kotahi?
I mean, this expenditure, it was unexpected, therefore wasn't in our cash flow plans. That's why we needed to draw down on the facility on the short-term facility that we have available to us. I suppose it's a hidden cost. We need to fund all of the expenditure until Waka Kotahi makes a decision. So, we are out for the full $3 million at the moment. The issue that Waka Kotahi is facing is that there were weather events right across the country, and that they have already overspent their annual allocation for emergency works in about the space of the first 2 months. So they are working out how, even though it is they might approve it, how they actually fund it from their resources and what other changes they will need to make, including possibly going back to Treasury or to the Crown to get additional funding approved, because the incidents in Nelson Marlborough were very significant. I think they're funding an even higher percentage up there because of the scale of work, and they need to fully fund the work that it needs to be undertaken on the state highway network. That is 100% something that they need to fund. So they are facing a number of financial challenges. No indication that they won't pay for it. It's just they need to, essentially, we're funding it in the interim until they sort out their own financial position.
Right.
And because it's unbudgeted expenditure, the only way that we can fund it is by dipping into reserves or by borrowing short term in order to keep good faith with our contractors who have pulled out all the stops to fill the holes or reseal or fix the bridge, whatever it was. I think Ohau Bridge was a part of that damaged infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further?
If there's nothing further on that page, page 7 looks at the narrative again around a statement of financial position, noting that the important thing to bear in mind when we get to the statement of financial position is that, being the old term balance sheet, the only budget that we have for that is the year-end budget. So that's the position at June 23. We don't budget for balance sheet month by month as we do for revenue and expenditure. So it's important to note that there are some variances that will be redressed by the time we get to June 23. For instance, one of the largest ones is the revaluation of roading network, which is budgeted at about $40 million. Given our recent history with revaluations, it's likely to exceed that. The recent property revaluation was budgeted at 7 million and became 37 million, and is likely to move slightly higher than that by the time we're finished. We also cover off changes to loans to other entities. Kurau Duntroon Irrigation Company has been a problem since the company went into administration back in February, March. The administrator has requested that we compound interest to the loan, so they're going to pay it. It's just that they have no cash flow or limited cash flow, so we're adding it to the loan. We've also recovered all of our legal costs in relation to sorting out our own position with regard to that administration, but we're assured that that loan is sound and secure and will be paid in the fullness of time. Also, we did not expect, so it wasn't in the budget, we didn't expect to be advancing almost $2 million to the Waitaki District Health Services Company, while they sort out their own funding arrangements with the new health authority. Investments in other entities, LGFA borrower notes are a unique investment which we must take as part of our borrowings with LGFA. If we request $1 million in bonds, either floating or fixed bonds, they retain 2.5% of that, and that is our investment in the LGFA. They pay a similar rate to what we're paying on our borrowed $1 million. They pay slightly less than that on our $50,000 to $25,000 investment. Term deposits, any bank deposits with an original maturity exceeding 90 days are treated as term deposits and not as cash. So at the 30th of September, we had $2 million at the end of June, we had $2 million. The end of September, both those deposits had matured and been repaid. Borrowings, we borrowed $4 million from the LGFA in August. Part of that was to fund the emergency works. Subsequent to the end of September, we borrowed a further $5 million. That was to provide further funding for those emergency works and also to fund the loan to the health company. So our total borrowings from the LGFA are right now $34 million. In this report, they show as 29. Any questions about what I've quickly raced through before we move into the actual numbers? Or am I going too fast, or is this helpful at all?
I think, sorry, just for clarification, so the emergency works aren't from reserves, they're actually new borrowing.
So when we refer to reserves, reserves are on paper, they're not represented by cash in the bank. So yes, we have one prime bank account, which is normally fluctuating between $0 and a couple of million. We've got a call account where we put surplus funds, but anything untoward, out of the ordinary, we've got to pick up from other sources, because if it's not in the cash flow, if it's not in the right month of the year, then we don't have it.
So just to clarify, there will be a report presented to council early next year that will summarise the full impact of the emergency works and present funding options to council. So that's when a formal decision will be made about how the deficit for the year will actually be funded. So that'll present this in more detail. Really, all we're talking about in this is funding the cash flow impact of it.
I'm not seeing the fixed asset holdings. What is that actual specific to? So the point I make is you can't sell roads or infrastructure or anything else. So the reason that they used or offered, what is their purpose?
Sorry, can you, I didn't quite get what you were looking for.
Sorry, I see the fixed assets have been increased by 44 million. So, but what is the value of that fixed asset from a business percentage? Because you can't actually sell that fixed asset.
So the 44 million, 44.75 million is what we expect the revaluation of the roading infrastructure will add to the value of those assets. And that will in turn increase our depreciation charges related to roading. And as I indicated earlier, given the current climate out there, the price of getting work done on the roads has increased such that that 44 million is likely to be much higher. because the revaluation is based on the contract rates for building, for putting down your base and then putting up asphalt or whatever on top of that base. It's all based around contract rates for the contractors doing that work. So effectively, the revaluation of the roading network looks at what it would cost to rebuild the whole thing, and then depreciates it back, in theory, by the number of years that it's already existed. So that's not real money at all. And it debits, it increases the value of the roading and increases our revaluation reserve, and long-term increases the depreciation charge. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Sorry. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, the question is for you, Simon, as much as Paul and Ian, but one for you as well, Ian. I'm sorry, maybe I'm thick, but I'm still trying to get my head around what we've borrowed or spent regarding the emergencies. If you 2 million from the BNZ's fund, short term, and 4 million from LGFA, half of which, 1.95, is the hospital. So if you assume the other two, which was what you said was for emergencies, that means we've borrowed 4 million to pay for $3 million worth of unanticipated costs. On the face of it, it looks like that. I guess I've got that wrong, but that's what it looks like.
Well, yeah, because I've focused on the emergency works and I've focused on the loan to the health company. But in the meantime, we've also had other capital costs. We've had projects in the Three Waters space, which were funded from MB, from the Tranche 1 water funding that we received last year. Those projects have had to continue, even though we have exhausted the original funding. So I glossed over that, perhaps focusing on the two other aspects, but we have to keep those capital projects going until they're finished. Otherwise, we're not delivering a finished product for the community. So sorry about that. Yeah.
Look, just coming back to the matter that I said, perhaps addressed to you and Simon and Paul, the 44 million that John referred to, this extra assessment, I think one of the things, really I'm asking if you'd agree with this, I think we have to sit down and have a really thorough look at depreciation, what we unfund, whether we actually extend shelf life of assets to reduce annual imposts. I mean, I really think we're basically being priced out of business by increased revaluations that are, if we just automatically load the depreciation charges parallel and equivalent, then essentially we're going to reach a point very quickly where we can't do anything other than fund depreciation, because that's the only thing that a reasonable rates increase will allow. What's your view?
I think the point that you raise is a really valid one, and this is to a degree what I was referring to at the start of the session today, where I said I'm looking for things for us to actually collectively workshop together and get a better understanding of. I think there's two things that have come out of this. One, we all appreciate that this revaluation thing's kind of tricky, and especially in an environment where costs are inflating and the value of your assets based on what it would cost to rebuild it. If you have to make a new road out of jib, it's going to get a hell of a lot more expensive than what it was before, right? So we have this problem where we've got ridiculously increasing value of assets that we've then got to depreciate. And I think that an action from this is for us to consider with Mr. Hope and Mr. Wells, how we could potentially workshop that and get a better understanding of it and have a better appreciation of how we could deal with it. And I think the second action from this is that another thing that would be really useful for us to look into further, and I was going to raise it later when we went through the Bancorp report, but I think a really useful thing for us to understand would be, what does our debt profile look like? How does that relate to our investments? You know, we've got a $1.95 million unexpected loan that we've taken out to help out with health services over the course of the next while. So understanding that debt profile, understanding the sensitivity of that debt profile to changes in OCR and the risk that the council faces as both a borrower and a lender would be a very useful exercise for us to go through as well. Yeah, Kircher.
If I could just add to that, yeah, I totally agree on some of that work needing to be done around the profiling, etc. Essentially, when it comes to depreciation and valuation of assets, we want to make sure that we get that as accurate as possible, because part of that is if we get the valuation wrong, we're either collecting too much depreciation or not enough. The other is, if it is accurate, then we need to collect that depreciation if we want to carry on the services at the level they currently are. So that's something that we need to be very mindful of. Essentially what you're describing is what a lot of households are facing now. The cost of living is going up. More and more is being spent on the groceries, so to speak, and the mortgage. And, you can't afford to get the, update your car or whatever, because, there's just not enough money there to do those things as well. So it's a challenge that we face, and it's particularly pertinent in roading, where construction costs and materials have gone up so much. So a bit like, building construction. So, those are the challenges. The other thing that we can do as part of a workshop is look at what those levels of service are. I mean, if there are roads that don't need to be maintained as much, and I'm not saying there are, because many roads aren't being maintained to the level we would like them now. But if there's those sorts of things, if there are sections of roads that we actually aren't really needed anymore, that we could stop those roads and not have to maintain. Those are ways of pretty drastic ways of finding the savings to actually afford the things that we want to do, and to make sure we are putting enough maintenance into the rest of the system. So definitely a topic for workshop, but I think we are pretty much facing that issue of we need to make some tough decisions. We need to talk to our community about levels of service and what we have where. So anyway, just hope that adds to the discussion as well.
Thank you. And I think that's a strong driver for us to put this down as a workshop as part of the path for the new year. Back to you, Mr. Wells.
Just comment about depreciation. Of course, depreciation, we must depreciate our assets. Accounting standards require that. The auditors are on our backs to make sure that we're doing it right, that we've calculated the economic lives of assets appropriately. I was going to get to that. The only area where you can play with depreciation is the decision to fund or unfund. If you fund 100% of depreciation, then that has to be paid for in some way. If you choose to fund none of it, then it doesn't actually impact on the ratepayers. But what it does mean is that in the future, you will have to find replacement funding for the assets when it comes time to replace them from another source. So it's a choice that is certainly worth workshopping.
Yeah, and in the interest of time, I think we probably need to move on from that one. But to your point, that is an option, as per Mayor Kirch's, around potentially unfunding maintenance of some of our assets.
Yeah. Sorry, just in the interest of time, then if we're all finished with page 7, there's a lot to go actually. The next page looks at capital expenditure, looking at capital expenditure by major category. Looking at where we are after 3 months compared to where we've expected to be, with some commentary. Any thoughts or questions on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Sorry, very quickly. I'm just trying to work out the very first one, roading. We have a budget. This is for the program of works, not emergencies. Budget's 1.6. The actual is 2.2 or 2.23. That's a very significant increase. And the explanation is the program was initially delayed due to the operational requirements and emergency. But why is the actual planned program, the scheduled program, so much in excess of budget?
I'll take that one. Look, it's essentially the opportunity arose to actually get some of this work delivered ahead of the original program, and so we took advantage of that. I mean, it's really, once some of the work was being undertaken on the network, it was more economic and more efficient to carry on with that work and undertake some of the capital projects essentially as a continuation, rather than sort of waiting a month or two when we originally scheduled it. So in the past, we've made a real effort as a team to actually get this spending underway earlier in the year rather than later in the year. So we actually take advantage, we have the benefit of that work over the summer, rather than sort of waiting till later in the year. So it's really, it will balance out by the end of the year, because that's a key requirement of funding arrangement with Waka Kotahi. But really, the sooner we can do this work, generally the better, because we get the benefit of it all the way through.
And I think just as a supplementary to that, it's really important that we all recognise that this is the report for the end of the first quarter, and we do have humps and troughs. And so if we were looking at a significant overspend at the end of Q3, that would be a really valid thing for us to be discussing and be concerned about.
And just on that, yesterday we paid $1.5 million for 1 month's work on resealing and resurfacing, which is part of the roading contract, which was a large chunk of work that was done unexpectedly, I must say, so far as the budget's concerned. But for the reason that Paul said, we were able to take advantage of contractor availability.
Councillor McCann.
So the projects that have been carried forward, is that funding still there? So if it was carried from the last financial year into this one, is that funding still part of this budget?
So when we present to council a schedule of proposed projects to carry forward, being unspent monies from the previous year or prior years, those projects always have funding with them, be that internal loans or use of reserves or user pays in some cases, but they're always fully funded as carry forwards. And the budget year to date includes those carry forwards. So we're measuring like with like. If there's nothing else on capital expenditure, the very first page of numbers, page 1, but it's actually page 9 of your agenda, looks at the statement of comprehensive revenue and expense. To the right, we have variance from year-to-date budget. Where it's green, it's a good thing. Where it's pinky, it's not so good. And below on the column, light blue highlights refer to the notes which appear below and on the next page. Are there any questions or concerns about that table?
Sorry, I noticed down on the expenses, it's 2022 actual is 27 or nearly 28 million. Can that be broken down a wee bit? Sorry.
Yes, it can be broken down a wee bit more. It appears in the annual report. It includes contractors and consultants, and contractors, as note 7 refers to, is actually the main reason why that is up by $3 million. Because you would expect at the end of the first quarter to be roughly 25% of budget. It isn't quite how it works, and this year it hasn't worked like that at all. But if you do want a breakdown of what's in that number, we can give that to you. But again, only at sort of a higher level, for instance, all of the contractors grouped together. But we can do that in future reports if you'd like.
So in the annual report, there's actually a note that breaks that amount down. That's the required disclosure. So yeah, we'll include that, essentially a summary of that note in the reports going forward.
There's nothing else on that page, and then the page 10 continues the narrative around why things have moved. We're all happy with that. I'll move through to the statement of financial position, which I'd stress the budget for 23 is the year-end position, and as I said, the $1,088,000 for property, plant and equipment includes the expected revaluation of roading at 44 million. There are comments on that 8, 9, 10, 11. Any thoughts or questions on that page or on the narrative?
Again, Ian, sorry, could assets held for sale, could you describe what they are, please?
So the assets held for sale are expanded on in the annual report again. This is 3 sections at the North End Business Park that were sold to Te Pari. The deal being that we would not require the sale to be settled for 10 years. And they, in the meantime, are paying interest on the 1.15 million by way of rent. The sale must be concluded in 2024. So we're coming up to the point where we can collect that money. And next year, the statement of financial performance will show that as a current asset because it will be due within 12 months. Moving on then from that to the narrative about that, which covers off some of the larger variances. Can we move into the Treasury report? So this is a report that's presented every quarter, breaks down the key elements of our financial position, being cash and our term deposits, being our borrowings, being our investments in particularly loans to other entities and in the LGFA borrower notes. You've all obviously studied this, so any questions?
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, sorry, Ian, page 3, current liabilities. I'm just trying to make sense of this. The current liabilities, trade and other payables. The budget was 12.5, and the actual was 9.8. And yet on the note 11 says accounts payable includes payment of 1.5 million to South Roads being part of the cost of roading emergency works. So the way I read that, it was sort of like, this is an unexpected increase. And yet the numbers say that we've spent about nearly 3 million less than we budgeted. So I'm just trying to, can you?
Sorry, Councillor. So let's just clarify. We've paused on going to the Treasury report. We're still talking to.
Oh.
No. I'm just want to clarify. Mr. Wells had moved into the Treasury report. You're referring back to note 11 off the back of the quarterly financials.
Well, I was referring to the.
That's fine.
That's fine. So the $9.8 million that's recorded at the end of September is 2.4 million higher than the position at June. And I think that's really what the explanation is referring to. The 12 million refers to the position that we've projected for June 23, which is still a long way off, and God knows what will happen in the interim. Budgets are simply roadmaps to take us from one date to another.
I just assumed that budget was quarterly.
No, so this is Mr. Wells and I were talking about this before in terms of presentation. So one of the tricky things here is that when you present this, you're always presenting it as at year end. And so we could take it out for now, but I don't want to do that because I think it's important that we're all aware of what the end game is. It just makes things a little bit trickier to understand at this point in time, because to your point, it looks like we're 3 million different, where in fact, as we move towards the end of the year, we won't be. Sorry, thank you. Back on now to the Treasury report.
So back to the Treasury report, which is a number of pages of detail and narrative, and hopefully it's helpful. But rather than go through it page by page, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have to speed the process along. Are we all happy with it? Excellent. I'll do it again.
But as a comment, I'm not particularly happy with the interest rates currently being charged by LGFA. And the ramifications from our point of view, if we continue to borrow, given what we're being asked to pay by way of interest now is a lot higher than it was originally. But I mean, that's the market, as Simon said earlier. So I doubt the only thing we can do is actually curb our appetite for borrowing.
Well, that would mean curbing our appetite to do our business, which is not really something that we're here for. We were extremely fortunate in the initial stages of our relationship with the LGFA to get loans at rates like 0.65 and 0.93%. And the Bank Corp Treasury report shows in one of those tables what it would cost at the end of September to borrow the same dollars, and it's eye-watering the increase that those rates have gone up by. But it is a valid point. But the LGFA is still cheaper than what we could turn around and go to the BNZ for.
Yeah, and so just on that, I think it's really important for us to both recognise that the LGFA is the cheapest source of funding that we can go to. It was established specifically for entities like us to go through. The LGFA are only charging us what the market is charging them, and through their collective borrowing and their credit ratings, they're certainly getting it at a lot better rate than what we would do in other senses. And to Mr. Wells' point, we do need to borrow money to perform the services that we're performing. We just need to be careful how we borrow that and how much we borrow and why we're borrowing it. And what I would really like to understand, and Mr. Wells referred to a page later in the Bancorp reports that looks at what the cost of borrowings would be if we were going out to market now. So I think that's under 2 debt and cover profiles. I think it's really important that we as a committee understand what the implications are if Reserve Bank moves OCR by 0.75 tomorrow. Now, that's not going to hit us straight away because we can see through the debt maturity profile that we don't have anything coming up for another several months. But at that point in time, we know that the rate's going to be higher. And I think that as a committee, it's important for us to note or be aware of the fact that when that debt comes off maturity, given the new OCR rate, it's going to result in an increase in interest costs to the council of X.
And a further complicating factor that we're going to have to start building into how we profile our borrowings is the impact of Three Waters and the potential repayment of essentially Three Water related loans to council. There's still no real clarity around how some of the financial arrangements that councils have entered into will actually be unwound as part of the potential Three Waters reform program. So we're more likely to start borrowing on relatively short-term basis to make sure that, again, we've got a good match between the inflow of funds from the Crown into council to repay this debt and the debt we have outstanding. So it's going to be an increasingly complicated picture over the next sort of 18 months.
Look, I personally accept all that, and I accept the Chair's comments about LGFA being a cheaper source. However, it is quite clear from Bancorp's own report to us that our position isn't as good as it was. The very last sentence on page 6 says, despite the increase, WDC's cost of funds remains lower than many of its peers in the local authority sector. All the previous Bancorp reports have said we are the lowest. So what they're saying is we're now in the pack. So, I mean, we just need to be aware that even if it is the cheapest, it still comes at a cost. essentially a future cost to our residents and ratepayers.
Absolutely no different to any individual who's got a mortgage and is facing an interest rate reset at the moment. In a rising interest rate environment, we need to be much more aware as a borrower, as a net borrower, we need to be much more aware of what our sensitivity is to costs. And to my point earlier, I think that that's an important thing for us to get a better understanding of, and I will take an action to work with Mr. Wells and Bancorp to be able to present back some decent sensitivity analysis around what if scenarios, so that we all have a greater awareness of what the impact will be on our expenses.
Right, so where to now? Any further questions on the Treasury report before we move into the Bancorp Treasury report? So the bank, there's an interesting graph that I thought might have caused questions on page 18, isn't it? This keeps moving around, which shows our cash position relative to the last 4 years, or the last 3 years, plus the current year, as at September. That cash position is not only cash at the bank, but investments in loans to other entities and offset by the LGFA borrowings, which show that we are still a net lender, not a net borrower. Happy with that?
Sorry, Mr. Wilson, Councillor McCann.
Sorry, just one quick question. So when we're repaying these sums back, so I see the sum here, the 2, 3 year, 4 year loans. Is there a principal content in amongst the interest rate, or we just pay the interest and then pay it back as a lump sum when it falls due?
So the LGFA borrowings, they charge us interest quarterly or 6 monthly, and we pay the principal on maturity plus interest to that point from the last interest date. So we don't pay an element of principal ongoing through the term of the loan.
So they are all, each of the loans that we take from the LGFA are one of 3 types. So we're either taking a floating rate note, a fixed rate bill, or commercial paper, but in all instances we pay back the original principal at maturity. Commercial
paper is very short term, as Mr. Neil suggested, normally no longer than 6 months. And with that one, we are paying current interest rates when we roll them over. Our next rollover will happen on the 7th of December, and we'll be rolling that through till the 15th of April to coincide with the maturity of one of our other bonds. Then there's so we're talking about the Bancorp Treasury report.
I think we just moved through to page 31. This is, I think, the Bancorp report. It's interesting.
This is a table that appears in the annual report. Council funds its activities from a variety of sources, including internal loans, which are a paper transaction that puts the cost of the project on the ratepayers who will benefit. So those who are on a particular water scheme will pay internal loan charges relating to that water scheme, separate from other water scheme users. At the end of June, just short of $34 million outstanding on internal loans, and below that a table of the makeup of the new loans that were taken out during the period. Do you have any questions on internal loans? Internal loans are normally for 20 years and interest rates are based on council's cost of borrowings.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. Look, there's 2 questions. the indoor recreation centre initial works, 90,000. I think it would be relevant for us or full council and the community to see what those how those costs or how that money's been spent. I was quite surprised to see the figure that high, but then when I thought it through, it probably isn't actually very high, but it would be a good piece of communication, I think, to make that clear. But the real question I have, when were we told there was an operational deficit at the Oamaru Airport? When did the council sign off a loan to pay for it? When have we seen the budget? The answer to all three questions, as far as I'm aware, is we weren't and we haven't. Now, what's afoot there, please?
It is a fact that the airport does not make money. Property are working to address that through reviewing the farm leases and the price for other activities out there. But in the meantime, we have perhaps taken that on ourselves, if you haven't signed it off, in order to basically normalise the situation so that the airport starts off from ground zero. If we've done that wrong, then we can turn it around. But that seemed sensible to us, much the same as there's a loan there for the dog pound, which you may not have signed off on either, but you did. Okay.
So I guess just to pick up on that point, what is the process for approval for signing off on internal loans, and is there a materiality point that comes to the council?
Normally a project would be approved by council through the annual plan process or through a subsequent meeting, and the funding sources for that project would be itemised. They would be, as I've said before, internal loan, depreciation reserves, other reserves, user pays, subsidies. Yeah.
Right. Okay, the loan may or may not have been within delegated authority. It may have been something that you guys did with the best of intentions and so forth. The larger point is, if there should be, and we should have seen a budget. And if there was a deficit, we should have been told why it existed and how long. In other words, what I'm saying is the airport is a black hole financially. We don't know enough about it as elected members, in my view, at a variety of levels. And this raising of a loan to fund a deficit of which we had not been advised is evidence, in my view, of that. And I just want to flag to the chief executive and to Paul and to you, and to Simon perhaps, that either this committee or the council as a whole gets more information. We are entitled to receive it, and we should.
So that's a good action for us to take away. We can understand more around how this process works. If it's under a policy now where there's a delegation for it to be able to happen, then that's absolutely fine. We just acknowledge it, but we would like to see greater transparency around it. Thanks. Sorry.
So Eden, could you just explain what commercial and development activities, it's $8 million closing balance, what that involves, please?
So commercial and development activities are around property and around the airport is in there, and also economic development if we had any loans relating to that activity. But principally it's property.
Yeah, and that's another item. We can bring some further information back to you, showing the individual loans sitting under that activity.
There are a number of very old property loans that are compounding, waiting for property sales to fund those loans, and potentially Forrester Heights was at one point tagged to fund some of those loans as well.
So I think in the interest of time and our desire to understand it further, these are good examples of where we've got some new council members, and it's a really good opportunity for us to get a little bit more colour around some of those bigger numbers that are in there. So I will work with you to be able to surface that Mayor Future.
Yeah, probably just supporting Councillor Hopkins really just around process. Yeah, for the last 3 years, I was associate chair with responsibilities for property, and I don't think I was asked to a single meeting with the property team on any of the issues that you raised. I think it's, there's been a lack of oversight in some of the activity there, and some of the some of the allocation of costs, I think, are a major concern around, an airport which is making very good revenue overall, but the costs are just exceeding that revenue. So, I think more does need to be done, and we need to tidy up some of those elements and make sure that, it's delivering on the things we want it to deliver on, and that it's following a strategy which, again, is, we're working through a property strategy as well as a airport master plan, and as the person who's supposed to be leading those things, I've had very little oversight on that as well. So I feel that frustration, and I think we just need to do better. Thank you.
Another point of action. Anything further, Mr. Wells, Mr. Hope, on page 31, or any further questions?
We can move on, if everyone's happy with that, to special funds and reserves at 30 June, $17.7 million as summarised on page 32, and greater detail on page 33, along with the principal purposes for those funds and the narrative under the table. As I stress, these reserves are on paper. They don't exist in cash. We don't have a bank account for the disaster fund. We don't have a bank account for the community housing fund. But they exist on paper and in the balance sheet. Questions on that? Questions on the theory of it? That's the end of that particular aspect of the financial report.
Sorry, thank you. But just, look, we will bring the reserves funds in more detail as part of the annual plan process, because these are an important source of funding that is available to council to fund projects and other undertakings in the community that don't require a direct rates input. So this is just at the summary level. There's several pages specifying the individual funds and the purposes that they can be used for. So again, that's another item that we will bring forward as part of the information to be presented as during the annual plan discussion.
Excellent, thank you. So off the back of that, can I ask someone to move received? Councillor Hopkins, seconded. Councillor Mackay, thank you. I now would like to propose that we move. Pardon? Oh, sorry, I need to put the motion to the meeting. Let's vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. All against? No. Still learning. Thank you very much. I now propose that we move into public excluded.
I'll second that, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, may I, in the process of doing so, if you'll allow me, I'd like to briefly raise a matter that I'd like the Chief Executive, Andrew Paul, to consider and perhaps report back. A ratepayer said challenged some of the content of this public excluded material, basically saying that specifically what the council spends should be a matter of public knowledge and information, not a matter of private knowledge. Payments throughout private individuals, yes, that's confidentiality and the like, but what we are spending should be a matter of public information. Now, we've sought a list of companies. If it's important for us to have that list, it's arguably important for the public as well. It may well be that the cash quantums involved are commercially sensitive and covered by privacy matters. But if we do deem it appropriate to identify the most significant companies with which we do business, then I think that could be a public information, either in this report or as part of the annual report. I don't know. Do you have any immediate comment, Paul? I mean, the ratepayer's argument is that it shouldn't be in public excluded. And I see some merit in that proposition. I also see some justification for keeping it in public excluded. So I'm really asking you guys to give some consideration to Perhaps a two-stage report, some in public, some in private.
Certainly just a listing even of our major suppliers, and we could even list them in essentially rank order. I don't see that there would be any issue with that. It is only in public excluded because of the dollar amounts involved. Some of those are, directly attributable to a single contract. And a lot of those contracting arrangements do have a level of confidentiality attached to them. Some of the big suppliers where it's a whole bunch of things, we spend a lot of money with Whitestone and South Roads because clearly it's something like the parks contract, and even the amount of that contract may have gone through a council meeting, but some of the others, where it isn't an individual piece, be quite hesitant about disclosing that. So rather than a very complicated process, a listing would be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so an action will be taken for us to look at that, and I think we should also add in there a materiality point. I don't think that we need to go down to the nth degree in terms of the list that we present. Thank you. Okay, so noting that, can I please just make sure that we're comfortable moving into? Excellent, thank you. So I now put to the meeting that we move to public excluded. Please, all in favour?
Aye.
All against? Thank you. Carried. I'll now say goodbye to the audience. Thank you, everybody, for who joined us today. I promise I will get better with the process over the course of the next 3 years. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.